Los Angeles authorities have declared the entire downtown area of the city an unlawful assembly zone after a third consecutive day of unrest. Clashes between protesters and law enforcement were sparked by the crackdown on immigration ordered by U.S. President Donald Trump and intensified after the president's decision to deploy the National Guard. Dozens of people have been arrested so far, and L.A. police warn more will follow.
One near the intersection.
Another night of chaos and violence on the streets of Los Angeles. Police trying to contain the unrest, triggered by dozens of arrests by ICE, the U.S. Immigration Enforcement Authority. Early on Sunday, peaceful protesters rallied in front of the City Hall and in downtown LA. Elsewhere, demonstrators clashed with the National Guard and law enforcement. The National Guard was deployed by U.S. President Donald Trump, who bypassed the California governor's authority. Trump warned he would do the same in other cities should the protests spread.
I have a little statement. They say, they spit, we hit. I told them. Nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military, which they do as a common thing. They get up to them this far away and then they start spitting in their face. That happens, they get hit very hard.
California's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, has criticized Trump's order in a statement echoed by Los Angeles mayor.
No, my disappointment is I've been talking to the federal government for days. I was hoping to prevent this situation from happening. I was trying to encourage the administration that if they deployed the National Guard in Los Angeles, it would create a sense of chaos. It's the last thing our city needs.
Los Angeles Police Department admits the protests are out of control, but officers assure they can handle them without help from federal troops. Law enforcement itself facing questions over its tackling of demonstrations. Like in this incident, when a rubber bullet hit a journalist.
You just shut the fuck up! You okay?
Protest groups have called for the demonstrations to continue. In a city of immigrants, anger at President Trump's crackdown is growing by the day.
And we can now speak to DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez, who's on the ground in L.A. Benjamin, what can you tell us about the situation?
So it's a very dynamic situation here. There's some parts of protesters that are still here. Some are lighting fireworks. Some are also looking to clash with the police. We are in the downtown area right next to the City Hall, where earlier today there was a big protest. And behind me, this building, that's the headquarters of the LAPD, of the Los Angeles Police Department. All of the downtown area has been declared an unlawful assembly. And that's something that local authorities and also police have repeated over and over, telling those smaller groups of protesters that are still here to leave the area.
What role exactly does the National Guard play at this moment?
So we have not seen them here. This is local police that are here in riot gear, also some of them with guns for rubber bullets. There's a lot of movement. As we see these little groups also moving from one place to another, we have not seen yet that National Guard. Let's remember that there's elements of the National Guard that have been activated, and it's the first time. That's what makes the situation so remarkable. It's the first time since 1965 that the President of the United States activated the National Guard without not consulting with the governor, in this case with Gavin Newsom, but also doing it against what the governor actually wanted. That's what we've heard from the mayor of Los Angeles, but also from Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor here in California, saying that this is something that local enforcement, the police could have handled, that it was not necessary to send these soldiers, these reserve soldiers that are partly part of what every state has. So every state in the United States has a National Guard, but also in types of crisis and of war, the authority then heads to the executive branch. So it's the president that can actually activate it. We've heard that around 300 of those troops have arrived, but remember the White House said that they would send 2,000, and there was a reaction only a couple of minutes ago by President Trump on his Truth Social post in an all caps message saying, send in the troops. So we can see that this tension is ongoing while local officials say that they can handle the situation on the ground, and Washington saying that they are not capable of actually taking care of law and order against these protesters, and are also vowing to send even more soldiers. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth even mentioned that he would be open to sending Marines to the city of Los Angeles.
All of this, the California governor has called a serious breach of his state's sovereignty. So why exactly is Trump sending in troops anyway?
So it's a message that he wants to send. It's quite similar also to other cases that we have seen. There have been clashes and there have been discussion with the governor of California. Also, when it comes to the wildfires, there was a lot of discussion of accusing him of not doing enough. We heard that local officials here in Los Angeles also want to sue the Trump administration, saying that it was not in the options that they actually have to send National Guards here to Los Angeles. This is the third night of protest that we're having here at the city, followed by this raids. And when we see some protesters also spraying graffitis on some of the building, we see several Mexican flags also here protesting against the police, also protesting against the activity by ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's how they started all of these protests here in downtown Los Angeles. As we expect this to continue for the night, it's a very dynamic situation here. We hear some choppers also flying above the area where we are right now. Maybe you can also hear those fireworks. So LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, is on high alert and repeating the message over and over that people should leave this area here that has been declared an unlawful assembly.
This is DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez in LA. Thank you so much for that update. Let's take a closer look now with Tyson Barker. He's an analyst on U.S. domestic and foreign policy and a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. Tyson, welcome back to DW. Now, the California governor and all his Democratic colleagues in other states, for that matter, agree that this is an alarming abuse of power, sending in the National Guard against the will of the state government. Is that even legal?
I think in the strictest interpretation of the law, it can be seen as legal. That will be tested in court. And of course, that is consistent with the Trump administration's actions in a number of areas, be it, its exclusion of international students from universities, be it its decisions on law firms. It continues to test the bounds of legality within the court system. And this is just one more instance of that. Of course, in this case in particular, they're looking at the federal relationship between states and the federal government. And that is definitely something that's going to be tested. Now, again, getting to the letter of the law, it seems like this is possible. It's just disproportionately escalatory. And one has to look at the objectives here. If the objectives here are to maintain and de-escalate the situation on the ground, then this doesn't seem to be the most prudent course of action.
The critics say, and let's look at these objectives more closely then, that this is not about restoring order at all, but rather a welcome opportunity for Trump to shift attention from his own policy failures. Is that something you would agree with?
Well, President Trump is clearly a producer. He has a television background, and creating a foil in the state of California and in Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass is definitely something that he feels will serve him well politically, domestically. The question is whether or not there is a recognition that this is pretty disproportionate, because, of course, these began as pretty high-profile ICE raids on workers on the working class, in communities, in textile factories that employed both undocumented workers and legal U.S. citizens and documented workers. And the response by unions has also been quite strong. So its exact political implications in the United States more broadly are still to be determined. But there is definitely a political message here to be seen.
Yeah. Another remarkable aspect of all of this is that on Truth Social, President Trump has called the protesters paid insurrectionists. How dangerous is this rhetoric?
Well, it's clearly untrue, but it's not inconsistent with either the president's rhetoric, his allies' rhetoric in the past, going back to George Floyd and before, and the rhetoric of others in other similar countries that look to delegitimize the concerns of peaceful protesters that are being brought to bear in the street, to basically say that they are not representing any real indignation, but are manufactured, astroturfed support for a particular cause. So I think that the rhetoric is incendiary, but it's not inconsistent with the president.
Could we be witnessing him laying the groundwork for a more expansive use of the military to suppress dissent, for example, by invoking the Insurrection Act, something he has not yet done?
If you look at President Trump's actions from the pardons of the January 6th, prosecuted actors in that case, pardoning all, to his tariff actions, he tends to take in this administration a maximalist, all of the above approach to whatever course of action he sees as correct. He is clearly, as he was in 2020 in the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020, itching to invoke the Insurrection Act. At that time, he had guardrails within his administration, including Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who warned against that, saying that this was disproportionate and that would be breaking a taboo that is really, it's really a Rubicon to cross. At this point, he has more, let's say, pliant advisors in the Pentagon, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, that might be more willing to do so and have already basically hinted that this could be the future outcome. Because when you talk about deploying Marines domestically, you're basically talking about invoking a state of emergency in the United States, and that would necessitate the Insurrection Act invocation. But clearly, anybody can see that that would be a disproportionate response to what has largely been a peaceful protest.
Yeah. And the California governor and the mayor of LA have both warned that Trump's actions are only going to further inflame the situation. Where do you see their standoff headed?
I think that that is the true center of gravity. It's not in LA in the streets. That is a protest of what many people, working class people, see as an airing of legitimate or illegitimate, depending on legitimate, no matter whether you agree with it or not, contradiction or to a policy of the federal government. But the true center of gravity is this tension between the state of California and the federal government, and we shall see that tension continue to play out. I think it's going to continue to escalate, and the city of LA is just, let's say, collateral damage in that fight.
Those views, analyst Tyson Barker. Many thanks. Always great speaking to you.
Thank you.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has criticized the U.S. government over the immigration crackdown that has sparked the protests in Los Angeles. In his speech on Sunday, Sheinbaum defended migrants living north of the border, insisting Mexicans in the United States are good men and women.